Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every life when the mirror tells a hard truth. Not the polished truth we show the world, but the cracked one, the one shaped by loss, disappointment, and prayers whispered in the dark. We've all been there. That place where plans fell apart, where strength felt borrowed, where hope had to fight just to breathe. And yet here you are, still standing, still breathing, still called. You see, brokenness is not the end of the story. It's the soil. It's the place where faith gets tested, stretched, and transformed, because God has never been intimidated by fragments. He specializes in them. He takes what looks finished, forgotten, and flawed, and he uses it to build something fearless. From broken to bold is not a jump. It's a journey. It's the quiet decision to get back up when no one is clapping. It's choosing obedience over comfort, purpose over pain. It's learning that the very thing that tried to bury you was the thing that planted you. Every scar you carry is evidence that you survived what was meant to stop you. Every tear you shed watered the courage you're standing in today. Boldness doesn't mean you were never afraid. It means you trusted God more than your fear. It means you kept moving when the road made no sense, believing that the author of your life was still writing. So tonight, don't shrink. Don't apologize for your journey. Don't underestimate what God can do with a willing heart and a surrendered spirit. What broke you did not disqualify you. It prepared you. And the same power that carried you through the storm is calling you now to rise, to speak, to live, and to walk boldly into everything you were created to be. Brokenness is a beginning, not a burial, even though it rarely feels that way when you're standing in the middle of it. When things fall apart, the first instinct is to believe something has ended for good. A relationship shatters, a dream collapses, a door closes you prayed would stay open, and suddenly it feels like life has lowered you into the ground and thrown dirt on top of your potential. But brokenness has a way of lying to us. It tells us the story is over when, in reality, a new chapter is being written beneath the surface. What we often call broken is simply the moment when what was familiar no longer works. It's the stripping away of false strength, borrowed confidence, and shallow certainty. It's the place where you can no longer rely on applause, titles, or approval to carry you forward. And that's exactly why it's a beginning, because nothing truly meaningful is built on what's pretend. Nothing lasting grows without pressure. Seeds don't sprout in the light. They begin in darkness, covered, unseen, surrounded by dirt. And yet, that darkness isn't punishment, it's preparation. Brokenness forces honesty. It confronts you with who you really are when the noise fades and the crowd disappears. It asks hard questions about faith, purpose, and identity. Not the polished answers you give in public, but the raw ones you wrestle with at night. And in that wrestling, something shifts. You begin to understand that strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about discovering what holds you together when you do. There is a sacred exchange that happens in broken places. Pride gives way to humility. Control gives way to surrender. Self-reliance gives way to trust. The weight you've been carrying alone finally gets placed where it belongs. Brokenness opens your hands, and open hands are the only ones that can receive what God is ready to give. You don't come out of that place weaker. You come out clearer, more grounded, more aligned with who you were created to be. What feels like a burial is often a breaking open. Burials hide things permanently, but beginnings uncover what's been dormant. They awaken courage you didn't know you had. They sharpen discernment. They deepen compassion. Suddenly, you don't just speak about hope, you understand it. You don't just talk about faith, you've leaned on it. You don't just admire resilience, you've lived it. Brokenness gives your voice weight. your story authority, and your presence authenticity. Many of the strongest people you will ever meet were once reduced to fragments, not because they were weak, but because they were being reshaped. Fire doesn't destroy gold, it reveals it. Pressure doesn't crush purpose, it clarifies it. And the breaking moments of life often remove what couldn't go where you were headed anyway. They detach you from what was comfortable but limiting, familiar but small, safe but stagnant. In brokenness, you learn to move without guarantees. You learn to trust without seeing the full picture. You learn that progress doesn't always look like momentum. Sometimes it looks like endurance. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is get up again with fewer answers but deeper faith. That's where boldness is quietly being formed, not in the spotlight, not in the victory lap, but in the unseen decision to keep going. Brokenness doesn't erase your calling, it refines it. It doesn't cancel your future, it recalibrates it. What emerges from that place is not a weaker version of you, but a truer one. Less concerned with image, more committed to purpose. Less driven by fear, more anchored in conviction. What looked like an ending becomes the foundation for something stronger, wiser, and more intentional than what existed before. Faith grows strongest in adversity, not in comfort, not in ease, not when everything is going according to plan, but when the ground beneath you feels uncertain and the future refuses to explain itself. It's easy to say you trust when life is predictable. It's easy to believe when prayers seem to get answered on schedule. But faith is not built in moments where you can see the outcome. It is forged in moments where all you have is the promise. Adversity strips faith down to its core. It removes the extras, the rehearsed phrases, the surface level belief that works only when life cooperates. When pressure shows up, faith is no longer theoretical, it becomes necessary. You're no longer trusting because it sounds right, you're trusting because there's nothing else left to hold on to. And that kind of faith is raw, honest, and powerful. Hard seasons challenge your assumptions. They force you to confront what you believe about God, about yourself, and about the process. You begin to realize that faith isn't the absence of doubt. It's the decision to move forward despite it. It's choosing to stand when answers don't come, choosing to obey when clarity doesn't show up, choosing to believe that something meaningful is happening, even when you can't see evidence of it yet. Adversity trains your faith like resistance trains muscle. Without resistance, there is no growth. Without weight, there is no strength. Every setback, delay, and disappointment becomes a weight that either weakens you or strengthens you depending on how you respond. Faith that has never been tested has never been trusted, and faith that has never been trusted has never been proven. In difficult moments, faith becomes active. It learns to speak when fear is loud. It learns to listen when emotions are overwhelming. It learns to wait when impatience wants to take control. You begin to understand that faith isn't about controlling outcomes. It's about surrendering timing. It's about trusting that what feels like denial might be protection, and what feels like delay might be preparation. Adversity also deepens intimacy with God. When distractions fall away and self-sufficiency collapses, prayer becomes less about performance and more about dependence. You stop trying to impress and start trying to survive. And in that vulnerability, faith matures. You discover that God is not just present in breakthroughs, but faithful in silence, steady in uncertainty, and close in the struggle. Faith grows roots in adversity. Shallow belief can't survive storms, but rooted faith can bend without breaking. The deeper the roots, the stronger the tree, even when the wind howls and the rain doesn't stop. Adversity drives faith downward, forcing it to anchor itself in truth rather than emotion, in conviction rather than convenience. Through hardship, faith becomes personal. It's no longer borrowed from someone else's testimony or sustained by someone else's strength. It becomes yours. It carries your scars, your questions, your prayers that were whispered through tears. And that kind of faith doesn't collapse when circumstances change, because it wasn't built on circumstances to begin with. Adversity teaches faith to endure. It learns patience without timelines, hope without guarantees, and trust without visible proof. It understands that growth doesn't always look like progress, and that silence doesn't mean absence. Faith becomes steady, not because life is stable, but because belief has learned to stand firm in the middle of instability. In adversity, faith stops asking for shortcuts and starts asking for strength. It stops demanding explanations and starts seeking wisdom. It stops waiting for perfect conditions and starts moving with imperfect confidence. And in that place, faith becomes resilient, unshakable, and deeply grounded, shaped not by what was easy, but by what was endured. God restores what pain tries to destroy, even when the damage feels permanent and the loss feels irreversible. Pain has a way of convincing you that something precious has been taken beyond recovery, that what was broken cannot be rebuilt, that what was lost will never return in any meaningful form. Pain speaks in finality. It tells you the story has reached its end, but restoration speaks a different language, one that moves quietly, patiently, often invisibly, long before the results are seen. Restoration does not always look like replacement. Sometimes it looks like renewal. Sometimes it looks like becoming stronger in the places where you were once vulnerable. Pain tries to define you by what you've suffered, but restoration reshapes you through what you've survived. It doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. It takes what wounded you and uses it to deepen your wisdom, sharpen your compassion, and anchor your faith. Pain isolates. It pulls you inward. It convinces you that no one else could understand what you've been through. Restoration reconnects. It draws you back into purpose, into relationship, into meaning. What pain tried to cut off, restoration reattaches. What pain tried to silence, restoration gives a voice. What pain tried to harden, restoration softens without weakening. There is a divine precision to restoration. Nothing is random. Nothing is wasted. Even the moments you wish you could erase are woven into a larger story that carries intention beyond your understanding. Pain may scar, but restoration strengthens beneath the scar tissue. It builds resilience where fragility once lived. It creates stability where chaos once reigned. Restoration often happens in layers. It doesn't arrive all at once with fireworks and fanfare. It unfolds slowly, sometimes subtly, in ways you may not immediately recognize. A new perspective, a healthier boundary, a deeper sense of peace, a renewed sense of purpose. These are signs that something sacred is being rebuilt. Pain demands instant relief, but restoration values lasting transformation. What pain tries to steal first is hope. It convinces you to lower expectations, to guard your heart so tightly that nothing new can enter. Restoration invites you to hope again, not naively, but courageously. It teaches you that hope doesn't deny reality, it believes beyond it. It allows you to move forward without forgetting, trusting that what lies ahead carries more weight than what lies behind. Restoration does not mean returning to who you were before the pain. It means becoming who you were meant to be because of it. Pain may have interrupted your plans, but restoration realigns your purpose. What felt like a detour becomes a defining path. What felt like loss becomes leverage. What felt like emptiness becomes capacity. God restores identity before circumstances. He rebuilds confidence before outcomes. He heals the heart before changing the environment. Pain focuses on what's missing. Restoration focuses on what's possible. And as that shift happens, you begin to recognize strength where you once saw weakness, clarity where you once saw confusion, direction where you once felt lost. Even when pain leaves marks, restoration gives meaning to them. The wounds become testimonies, the setbacks become lessons, the tears become seeds, and slowly, what pain tried to destroy becomes the very thing that confirms you were never abandoned, never forgotten, never finished. Restoration does not rush, but it is relentless. It continues working even when you're tired, even when you doubt, even when progress feels invisible. Pain may have taken its best shot, but restoration answers with purpose. It rebuilds what was shaken, reclaims what was stolen, and revives what was buried beneath disappointment and fear, turning survival into strength, endurance into wisdom, and broken places into foundations for something greater. The journey from fear to courage is intentional, never accidental, and rarely comfortable. Courage doesn't appear out of nowhere, and it doesn't replace fear in a single moment. It is formed through repeated choices, made in the presence of fear. Fear shows up early, often uninvited, whispering doubts about your ability, your worth, and your readiness. Courage answers slowly, built through action, obedience, and trust taken one step at a time. Fear focuses on risk. It magnifies what could go wrong and minimizes what could go right. It keeps your attention fixed on failure, rejection, and loss. Courage, on the other hand, does not deny those possibilities. It acknowledges them and moves forward anyway. The transition from fear to courage begins when you decide that remaining where you are is more costly than moving forward uncertain. Intentional courage requires awareness. You have to recognize the voice of fear for what it is and refuse to let it become the final authority. Fear often disguises itself as wisdom, caution, or logic, but its true goal is stagnation. Courage questions fear's assumptions and asks whether safety is really security if it costs you growth, purpose, and fulfillment. Every courageous step is preceded by hesitation. That pause, that moment of internal resistance, is not weakness. It is the space where intention is formed. Courage grows when you choose alignment with purpose over agreement with fear. You may still feel afraid, but your actions begin to reflect conviction rather than comfort. The journey is intentional because courage demands consistency. One brave moment does not transform a life. Repeated brave decisions do. Each time you speak when silence feels safer, try again after failure, or step forward despite uncertainty, courage strengthens. Fear loses its grip not because it disappears, but because it is no longer in control. Courage also requires surrender. You cannot control outcomes, reactions, or timing. Fear thrives on the illusion of control, while courage accepts responsibility without demanding guarantees. When you release the need to manage every detail, you make room for faith to guide your steps. Intentional courage trusts direction, even when the destination is unclear. Along the way, fear will evolve. It may grow quieter or louder, more subtle or more aggressive. Courage must evolve too. What once required bravery may become routine, and new challenges will demand a deeper level of resolve. The journey never plateaus because growth never stops. Courage matures as perspective expands. Intentional courage reshapes identity. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone waiting to be ready, but as someone willing to move while still learning. Confidence grows not from perfection, but from evidence. Each step taken becomes proof that fear does not define you. Each risk survived becomes a reminder that you are capable of more than you imagine. The journey from fear to courage is also deeply personal. It cannot be outsourced or rushed. It is shaped by your experiences, your values, and your faith. What intimidates one person may inspire another, but courage is always measured by obedience to what you are called to do. not by comparison to someone else's path. Intentional courage changes how you approach life. You stop waiting for fear to disappear and start moving with it beside you. You stop asking whether you're qualified and start trusting that growth happens in motion. You begin to understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it through purpose, faith, and persistence. Over time, fear loses its power to paralyze. It may still speak, but its voice becomes familiar, predictable, and less convincing. Courage becomes your default response, not because life is easier, but because you are stronger, more grounded, and more aligned with what truly matters, moving forward with intention rather than retreating into what feels safe. Scars are proof of survival and purpose, not signs of weakness or reminders of defeat. They tell a story that words often cannot capture, a story of endurance, resistance, and refusal to quit. Every scar represents a moment when life applied pressure and you remained. You may not have felt strong in those moments, but strength was present, holding you together when everything felt like it was coming apart. Scars mark where healing happened, not where damage ended. They show that the wound did not win, that pain did not have the final word. What once bled eventually closed, and what once hurt eventually formed something stronger in its place. The presence of a scar means the body, the heart, or the spirit found a way to recover, adapt, and continue. Many people try to hide their scars, believing they disqualify them or make them less acceptable. But scars are not flaws, they are evidence. They prove that you faced something real and lived through it. They reveal resilience that cannot be taught in comfort or learned in theory. Scars show that you were tested beyond what you thought you could bear and discovered you could bear more than you imagined. Scars also give perspective. They change how you see pain in others. When you've been wounded, you recognize wounds more easily. You speak with empathy instead of judgment, patience instead of pressure. Your scars become bridges, connecting your story to someone else's struggle, offering understanding where words alone would fall short. Purpose is often birthed through scars. What you survived equips you to serve, to lead, to encourage, and to stand with credibility in places you once felt unqualified. Your scars give weight to your voice. They turn your message from theory into testimony. People trust someone who has been through the fire more than someone who has only studied the flames. Scars remind you that progress is possible even after trauma. They stand as physical or emotional reminders that time, faith, and perseverance can produce healing. While the memory of the wound may still exist, it no longer controls your movement or defines your future. The scar remains, but the pain no longer has the same authority. There is strength in acknowledging scars rather than denying them. When you own your story, you reclaim power over it. You no longer allow the past to shame you or silence you. Instead, you integrate it into who you are becoming. Scars become chapters, not conclusions. They inform your decisions without imprisoning your identity. Scars also refine courage. After being hurt, stepping forward again requires bravery. Trusting again requires strength. Believing again requires faith. Every scar represents a choice to keep going despite the risk of being wounded again. That choice is where true courage lies. Not in the absence of pain, but in the willingness to move forward, carrying its lessons. Survival alone is not the end goal. Purpose transforms survival into meaning. Scars help direct that transformation. They highlight what matters most. They shift priorities. They clarify values. What once seemed important may fade, while what truly matters gains focus. Scars reshape your sense of urgency, teaching you to invest in what lasts rather than what impresses. Scars do not disappear because they are not meant to. They serve as markers of growth, reminders of strength, and confirmations of purpose. They tell you that you have been broken open, but not broken apart, wounded but not destroyed. They stand as quiet witnesses to resilience, to faith tested under pressure, and to a life that refused to stop at the point of pain, carrying forward wisdom, compassion, and a deeper understanding of what it truly means to endure. Scars are proof of survival and purpose, not signs of weakness or reminders of defeat. They tell a story that words often cannot capture, a story written in endurance, resistance, and the quiet decision to keep going when quitting would have been easier. Every scar marks a moment when life applied pressure and you stayed standing. You may not have felt strong at the time, but strength doesn't announce itself. It shows up when everything else leaves. Scars mark where healing happened, not where damage ended. They are evidence that the wound did not win, that pain did not have the final word. What once bled eventually closed, and what once threatened to consume, you formed something tougher in its place. Healing doesn't erase the past, it transforms it. A scar exists because recovery took place. Many people try to hide their scars, believing they make them less acceptable, less qualified, or less whole. But scars are not flaws. They are receipts. They prove that you faced something real and lived through it. They reveal resilience that comfort can never produce, and experience that theory can never replace. Scars show that you were pushed beyond what you thought you could handle and discovered that you could handle more than you ever imagined. Scars change how you see the world. They sharpen empathy and soften judgment. When you've been wounded, you recognize wounds in others. You listen differently. You respond with patience instead of pressure, compassion instead of criticism. Your scars become bridges, connecting your pain to someone else's healing, allowing your story to reach places advice alone never could. Purpose is often born in the places that hurt the most. What you survived equips you to serve with authenticity. Your scars give weight to your voice and credibility to your message. People trust someone who has walked through the fire more than someone who has only studied it from a distance. Your experience becomes a tool. Your recovery becomes a resource. Your survival becomes a responsibility. Scars also remind you that progress is possible after trauma. They stand as living proof that time, faith, and perseverance can restore what was shaken. The memory of the wound may still exist, but it no longer controls your movement or defines your future. The scar remains, but the pain has lost its authority. There is power in acknowledging scars instead of pretending they don't exist. Owning your story takes courage. When you stop hiding, the past loses its ability to shame or silence you. Scars become chapters, not conclusions. They inform your wisdom without imprisoning your identity. They remind you where you've been without dictating where you're going. Scars refine courage. After being hurt, trusting again requires bravery. Believing again requires faith. Stepping forward again requires strength. Every scar represents a choice to keep moving despite the risk of being wounded again. That choice is where courage lies, not in avoiding pain, but in refusing to let it control your future. Survival alone is not the end goal. Purpose turns survival into meaning. Scars help shape that transformation. They clarify what matters, shift priorities, and sharpen focus. What once seemed important fades, while what truly matters comes into view. Scars remind you that life is fragile, time is valuable, and impact matters more than image. Scars do not disappear because they are not meant to. They stand as markers of growth, reminders of strength, and confirmations of purpose. They testify that you were broken open, but not broken apart, wounded but not destroyed, carrying forward wisdom, compassion, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you endured and emerged stronger. Obedience unlocks bold living. Not because it removes fear or guarantees success, but because it aligns your steps with purpose beyond your own understanding. Obedience is rarely comfortable. It often asks for movement before clarity, commitment before confidence, and trust before evidence. It challenges the instinct to wait until everything makes sense and instead calls you to move while questions still linger. Bold living is not rooted in personality, it is rooted in alignment. Some of the boldest decisions are made quietly, without applause, without affirmation, and without certainty. Obedience teaches you to value direction over comfort. It shifts your focus from what feels safe to what is necessary. In that shift, boldness begins to form not as recklessness, but as resolve. Obedience requires humility. It demands the willingness to submit your plans, your timing, and your preferences. That submission is not weakness. It is strength under control. It acknowledges that there is wisdom beyond your perspective and purpose beyond your comfort. When you obey, you step out of the need to be in control and into the confidence of being guided. Many people confuse boldness with loudness, but obedience often calls for quiet faith. It asks you to keep moving when no one sees progress, to keep believing when results are delayed, to keep showing up when recognition doesn't come. That kind of obedience builds internal courage. It strengthens character. It teaches endurance. It develops a boldness that doesn't depend on validation. Obedience also sharpens discernment. The more consistently you obey, the more clearly you recognize direction. Bold living is not impulsive, it is intentional. It is shaped by listening, waiting, and responding with faith rather than reacting with emotion. Obedience trains you to hear beyond fear, beyond pressure, beyond distraction. There is a cost to obedience. It may require walking away from opportunities that look good but aren't aligned. It may require patience when impatience feels justified. It may require standing alone when compromise would be easier. But that cost produces clarity. It strips away confusion and strengthens conviction. Boldness grows when your decisions are rooted in truth rather than convenience. Obedience builds momentum. Each step taken in faith becomes evidence that movement is possible. Each act of trust weakens hesitation. What once felt intimidating becomes familiar. What once required courage becomes discipline. Bold living emerges not from a single dramatic act, but from consistent obedience over time. Obedience also redefines success. Instead of measuring life by outcomes, recognition, or approval, success becomes faithfulness. That shift frees you from pressure and comparison. You stop chasing validation and start walking in purpose. Boldness becomes sustainable because it is no longer dependent on results. In obedience, fear loses authority. Fear may still speak, but it no longer decides. Obedience teaches you to act despite discomfort, to move despite uncertainty, and to trust despite incomplete understanding. Each time you choose obedience, courage is reinforced. Each time you delay obedience, fear gains ground. Bold living requires surrendering the need to understand everything before acting. Obedience invites you to trust that understanding often follows movement, not the other way around. Growth happens in motion. Confidence develops through experience. Faith deepens through practice. Obedience transforms identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone waiting to be ready and start seeing yourself as someone willing to respond. That shift changes how you approach challenges, decisions, and opportunities. Boldness becomes less about bravery and more about faithfulness, less about proving yourself and more about trusting direction. Through obedience, bold living becomes a way of life rather than a moment of courage. Decisions are guided by conviction. Actions are shaped by purpose. Movement is sustained by trust. Obedience does not make life easier, but it makes it clearer, grounding boldness not in impulse or ego, but But in alignment and faith, pain refines. It does not define, even though it often tries to convince you otherwise. Pain has a voice, and that voice is loud when wounds are fresh. It tells you who you are based on what happened to you. It labels you by loss, by failure, by disappointment. But pain is a process, not an identity. It is something you experience, not something you become. Refinement is rarely gentle. It involves pressure, heat, and time. Pain works the same way. It exposes what is fragile, what is unhealthy, what can no longer remain if growth is going to happen. While pain feels destructive in the moment, its deeper function is transformative. It forces change where comfort would have allowed stagnation. Pain strips away illusions. It removes false confidence, shallow strength, and borrowed belief. What remains is honest, raw, real. In that space, you discover what truly sustains you when everything else falls away. Pain reveals character before it refines it. It shows you where your foundations are weak and where your faith needs to deepen. What pain refines first is perspective. It changes how you see success, relationships, time, and purpose. Things that once felt urgent lose importance, while things that truly matter rise to the surface. Pain teaches you to value depth over appearance, substance over speed, and meaning over approval. It sharpens discernment, helping you recognize what deserves your energy and what does not. Pain also refines strength. Not the kind that performs well in public, but the kind that endures in private. The strength to get up again when no one is watching. The strength to keep believing when answers don't come. The strength to remain kind when bitterness would be easier. This strength cannot be taught, it must be formed. Identity shaped by pain becomes limited, fragile, and defensive. Identity refined by pain becomes resilient, grounded, and intentional. Refinement means pain passes through you without becoming you. It leaves wisdom instead of wounds as its final imprint. You carry lessons forward, not labels. Pain refines compassion. When you've suffered, your heart becomes more sensitive to the struggles of others. You stop minimizing pain because you've lived it. You stop rushing healing because you've needed time yourself. Pain teaches patience, empathy, and grace in ways comfort never could. Refinement through pain also clarifies boundaries. It teaches you what you can no longer tolerate, what you must protect, and what you need to release. Pain exposes patterns that harm you and invites you to choose differently. Growth often requires separation from what is familiar but unhealthy, and pain gives you the courage to make that separation. Pain refines faith by challenging it. It forces belief to grow deeper than circumstance. Surface-level faith collapses under pressure, but refined faith adapts. It learns to trust without timelines, to hope without guarantees, and to stand without certainty. Pain removes the need for everything to make sense and replaces it with the willingness to trust the process. Refinement takes time. Pain does not transform overnight. Growth happens slowly, often imperceptibly. There are days when it feels like nothing is changing, but beneath the surface, strength is forming, clarity is developing, and resilience is increasing. Pain refines quietly, consistently, and purposefully. Pain does not get to name you. It does not get to determine your value or limit your future. It can shape you, teach you, and strengthen you, but it cannot define you unless you allow it. Refinement turns suffering into wisdom, endurance into character, and hardship into preparation, leaving behind a version of you that is stronger, wiser, and more grounded than before. Boldness is born from trusting God fully, not from the absence of fear, difficulty, or uncertainty. It emerges when trust outweighs hesitation and faith becomes the foundation for movement. Trusting God fully does not mean having every answer or understanding every step. It means believing that guidance exists, even when clarity does not. and choosing to move forward anchored in faith rather than controlled by doubt. Trust requires surrender. It asks you to release the need to manage outcomes, to predict timelines, and to protect yourself from every possible risk. Boldness begins when control ends. As long as you are trying to hold everything together on your own, fear has room to operate. When you place trust where it belongs, courage rises to fill the space fear once occupied. Boldness formed through trust is steady, not reckless. It does not rush ahead without direction, and it does not retreat at the first sign of resistance. Trust teaches patience. It teaches obedience. It teaches the difference between impulsive action and faithful movement. Boldness grows as trust deepens, because each step taken in faith reinforces the belief that you are not walking alone. Trusting God fully also reshapes how you view obstacles. Challenges stop feeling like stop signs and start feeling like part of the process. Delays are no longer interpreted as denial, and difficulty is no longer seen as punishment. Trust reframes adversity as preparation. When you believe that purpose is unfolding, even in resistance, you move with confidence rather than frustration. Boldness requires identity anchored in trust. When you know who you belong to, you stop seeking permission from fear, people, or circumstances. Trust roots your confidence in something unshakable. Approval becomes less important. Comparison loses its grip. You move forward not to prove yourself, but to honor the purpose placed within you. Trusting God fully demands obedience, even when obedience feels risky. There will be moments when the step you are asked to take contradicts logic, comfort, or public opinion. Boldness shows up when trust chooses alignment over approval. Each act of obedience strengthens courage, and each moment of hesitation reveals where trust needs to grow. Trust also deepens resilience. When setbacks occur, boldness does not collapse because trust remains intact. Failure does not dismantle faith, it refines it. You learn that trust is not proven by uninterrupted success, but by consistency through uncertainty. Boldness persists because trust sustains it. Fully trusting God changes how you handle fear. Fear no longer dictates decisions. It becomes information rather than instruction. You acknowledge fear without submitting to it. Trust teaches you to listen beyond emotion and respond with conviction. The presence of fear does not signal weakness. The choice to trust signals strength. Boldness born from trust is not loud or performative. It is often quiet, disciplined, and deeply rooted. It shows up in daily decisions, consistent obedience, and long-term faithfulness. It is built through repetition, not spectacle. Trust grows with practice, and boldness grows alongside it. Trusting God fully also expands vision. You begin to see beyond immediate circumstances and temporary setbacks. Faith lifts your perspective, allowing you to move with purpose rather than panic. Boldness becomes a natural response when your eyes are fixed on something greater than the present moment. This kind of boldness does not depend on confidence in yourself, but confidence in God. When self-belief wavers, trust remains. When strength feels limited, faith supplies endurance. Boldness flows not from what you can control, but from what you can entrust. As trust deepens, hesitation weakens. Decision-making becomes clearer. Movement becomes steadier. You stop waiting for perfect conditions and start responding to divine direction. Boldness becomes less about courage in isolated moments and more about a lifestyle shaped by faith, surrender, and unwavering trust in God's guidance.